welcome everyone to our Conscious Movie of the Month. I'm Trina Wyatt, founder and CEO of Conscious Good, and I'm here with Mark Allan Kaplan, our host for our Movie of the Month group, and we have our special guest, Betsy Chasse, who is one of the producers and geniuses behind our film of the month, What the Bleep. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to start with a little meditation, and then I'm going to do a short little intro to What the Bleep, and then start off by inviting our special guest, Betsy, to contribute, and then we'll open to questions from everybody. So if we can get comfortable. This is going to be a little meditation based on What the Bleep. So we're going to do a little What the Bleep meditation for you to get us into the What the Bleep mode. All right, so let's close our eyes and bring our awareness to our breath. Just focusing on the feeling of our breath moving in and out of our body. Now I invite us to bring to our awareness our thoughts. And as we are observing our thoughts, invite us to hold our thoughts as bubbles floating through a field of consciousness. And now I invite us to expand this into opening our field to memories, just calling up memories just randomly, if you can do that, and imagining them in bubbles as well, floating in our field of consciousness. If you've seen What the Bleep, you could imagine them floating in the neural mind space that the film has created for us. And now I invite us to extend our awareness to our feelings, our emotions, and see if we could feel into how they're connected to our thoughts and our memories that we're calling out, or our experience of what happened prior to this moment. And see if we could feel into the connection between thoughts and feelings, memories, all of that. And see if we could feel into how that connection is this biochemical interchange of neural information from thought and memory into feelings. And now I invite us to see if we could sense how all of this affects how we perceive ourselves and others in the world. And see if for a moment we can step outside of that like our main character in the film was able to do at the end. And then now I invite everyone to return their awareness to their breath. And open your eyes when you're ready. So, here we are in What the Bleep universe, right? Just wanted to do a short little info and framing why we chose this film and why it is so special for conscious media makers and fans. That it holds a special place evolutionary-wise. That this film came at just the right moment as we were becoming aware of what was then just beginning to be called the cultural creatives as a cultural force. So it was right on the cusp of that, and in a way, it tapped into, it was the first film to tap into it. And the few years before this film was released, the idea of the cultural creatives was beginning to come out and people were talking about it. But it hadn't kind of coalesced into a clear cultural phenomenon all over the place. And we got a great example of that in Australia when they were using the film to see if they also had this cultural group there as it was in the States. And they found, yes, it was. So it's a beautiful example of riding this evolutionary wave. It is also a combination of what I call a seed work and a breakthrough work, which is rare. So it seeded future films. It became an inspiration for other films in this genre. And it also was breakthrough in that it tapped into a market that was brand new. And that, as we're just for conscious filmmaking and creativity and all that, how, I mean, we make films to raise consciousness, but we also make films about consciousness. And this is one that's trying to do both for us. And so it just hit that sweet spot, and to know that as conscious media makers, we have to be conscious if we want to really reach people. It helps us to be conscious of our own consciousness, of what we're trying to communicate in terms of consciousness, and where the field is at. And that's really tricky. But it was great this month that we got examples from Betsy and from Will and from Ron that you could see online of how they navigated this zeitgeist space that they found themselves in. So there's a great case study. So with that note, I would like to invite Betsy to maybe reflect on her experience a little bit, and maybe, you know, what she learned. I know, you know, we don't, you know, probably have enough time for everything that you've learned, because I'm sure you've learned tons, as we all do when we're making a film. So
You make us
Oh.
sound so smart. Because I don't think we have thought about any of that while we were making the movie. It's great to look back afterwards and have some sort of analytical perspective on it, to be able to go, oh, gee, look what we did and how amazing we were. But I think during the time, you mentioned the Cultural Creatives, which is a Paul Reyes book. And I told you this when we originally spoke. So when we went to go market the movie after we made the movie, we thought, well, how do we market this crazy thing? And we read, myself and another gentleman who was part of the marketing team, a guy named Pavel. Pavel was really the head of the marketing team. He said, I found this book. Let's read this book and see what they have to say. And so we read that book, and that was the understanding of, now we know who that we should be marketing the movie to. The next trick is, how do we find them? But so when you said the Culture of Creative books, that was literally our marketing template. Literally,
Wow.
It was the book that we read. And it was, I don't know even if it was new or maybe 10 years old. It wasn't brand new, but it was relatively new. But it was the first year that they had actually even released a market study. Now you can go online to LOHAS, and they do one like every year or every 2 years. And it's gone at this time a little bit more to health and sustainability and less to sort of like spiritual awakening and spiritual growth. But it's still a really relevant, like if you're a filmmaker and you're really trying to understand or create something around marketing, looking at the LOHAS website and looking at some of their research, it's still incredibly relevant. But, at the time that we went to make this movie, I think that we were just all on a genuine quest. I think what comes through, and at least for me, when I even go see films today, especially movies that call themselves conscious movies, I can really tell the difference between somebody who's trying to teach me something and somebody who's on a journey, on a quest to learn something, and they're so excited that they're sharing it. There's a distinct difference in the way that you experience the film. And I think that people really, loved the movie because Mark and Will and I were on a genuine quest to find it out. That's why it's so chaotic. That's why we couldn't decide what kind of movie we were going to make, a narrative, an animated, or a documentary. We're just going to stick it all in there because we were genuinely on this journey for information.
Can I ask you to add on, Betsy, how you got involved in the project? Like, at what point were you contacted? Who contacted you?
Yeah, it's actually a really funny story. I'm putting a fictional book about my experience of making With the Bleep, because it was a truly random, bizarre thing. I had actually quit making movies and started a company that made gourmet dog treats. And so I was not even in the business of making movies. And I literally was going broke making my dog treats. And I was doing well, but when you have a startup, as you know, Trina, there's a lot of expenses and not a lot of money coming in. And I really needed to make some money. And I had this funny experience where I went to this yoga class, and this teacher said, okay, you need to go home and make a list of what you want in life. And I was like, well, I want to get out of debt. And I was like, what I really want to do, I love making movies. I just hated making the movies that I was making before the Bleep. And I said, I want to make a movie that changes the world. And the next day, Mark Vicente called me on the phone, like the next day, and said, I have to come to your house. Now, the funny thing is, I had always had a huge crush on Mark Vicente because we used to work together doing movies. And so I thought, like, he's divorced, he's coming over. Like, he didn't even mention movie. He just said, I'm coming to your house. And he came over and he starts ranting about this project that he's on, and it's a documentary, and they need a producer. They don't know what they're doing, and they can't figure out how to put it together, and blah, blah, blah. And I just said, well, I kind of want to make a movie. Let me look at the movie. And he gave me a script. And at the time, the script was called Sacred Science. And it was they were originally going to take footage of talks from speakers like Candace Pert and a few people and edit those together in between these like bizarre, weird Saturday Night Live sketches. And it was very strange. And it made absolutely no sense to me. But what was profound about it was they had this script and they put together, they transcribed some of the talks, and there was an entire section from Candace Pert where she basically explained our neurophysiology, like how we become addicted to our emotions. And I, at this point, just so you know, had never in my life even heard the words quantum physics. I didn't know any of this stuff. But that piece, that one paragraph that they wrote out about why we keep getting into the same situations, her whole piece of work kind of blew my mind. It was a huge awakening for me personally. And so I called Mark the next day and said, okay, I'll talk to the guy. I get on the phone with Will. We have an initial conversation. Will is supposed to fly to LA on September 11th, 2001, so that we can have a meeting, because we've never met in person. We all know what happened on that day. I get a phone call from him and he says, I have no choice. We have to hit the go button. I'm hiring you. We're making this movie. And I ended up moving out of LA a week later, going to Washington. And Will is an amazing, so there's 3 filmmakers and we really are distinct. You know, Will is the physicist, really interested in science and of course science's connection to spirituality and our personal growth. Mark was more interested in sort of really the spiritual guy. You know, he'd done a lot of personal spiritual work and a lot of different work in that area. And I was like this newbie, just like, what the hell are you people talking about? And why do I care about this? And so we kind of, in a way, we're all perfect. If you look at the film, it's really 3-dimensional. And it's really got those 3 layers. And so that's one of the reasons I think people really liked it, is because you could step into the movie at any level of understanding. And because we had 3 distinct voices, and for whatever reason, we had a couple great editors too, who really understood how to layer those voices in such a way that no matter where you were in understanding, you could see this movie and still get something. And I think that's why even today, people who watched it 10 years ago will watch it again and go, oh my gosh, I saw a whole new part of this movie I never saw before, because it's very layered. And that's because of the 3 of us and our journey. That's how I ended up making the movie, randomly enough. And when I went to Will, he wanted to make this movie Sacred Science. And I convinced him, first it was a technical issue. The thing about the movie is we were on the cusp of digital and analog filmmaking. So half this movie is shot in film on 35 millimeter. And the other half is digital. And a lot of the footage that they were going to use of the talks was digital, but it was really bad quality. And one of the things that they learned, and I came to them and said, you're never going to be able to take this footage and put it onto a big screen. It's going to just blur out and it won't work. So you're going to have, if you want to have these people in the movie, you're going to have to interview them. We can't use this footage. So that was the beginning of a whole new journey. And once we went around and interviewed everybody, what came to realization was what we thought we were going to say, we can't say anymore, because these interviews are so much more interesting and deeper and mind-blowing than the little clips we were going to pull out from some talk. So then we had 90 hours of interview footage. We cut that down to 6 hours. And then we looked at it and said, well, how do we put this together? And I always felt like, from my perspective, that it was always so wonky and talky and intellectual and heady, that how is a regular everyday person like me gonna relate? And so that's why we wrote the Amanda story, was because it really was like, and that was the only way that I felt like we have to tell a story. And when we tell the story, that's how people like me are going to get it. And then the animations were just sort of the visual, you've got to give somebody something to look at. So that's kind of how it came together.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. It really makes me think about, it really kind of affirms some of the research that we've done on this and that. One of the ways to tap into this bigger field is if you're part of it. You're personally, you know, like you said, you were on the journey that others were out there on the journey as, and so you were in that groove.
Yeah.
So one of the ways to kind of tap into what's going on is if you're seeking in the same field where your topic is and where others are.
And each of the moments that Amanda had were, so like the drawing of the blue pencil, the eyeliner pencil, that actually Mark did that in the shower and came to us one day and said, I just did this crazy thing and I was in the shower and I drew all over myself, and we're like, all right, it's going in the movie. So it was, you know, even though Amanda was a female character, Amanda was Mark, Will, and Betsy.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because when a filmmakers are tapping into their personal journey, there's an interesting phenomenon where it becomes universal, because we're going into that, we're coming from our true self, and all of us can relate to that. So there's this kind of tapping into the universal through the personal.
Right.
And it really feels like that's what you guys were doing.
Right.
And I think this is a great lesson. This is something that actually we've been playing around with, is when you're creating, when you're writing, to have the different voices represented in your writing team, in your creative team, seems like a very powerful creative cauldron to create.
Well, it definitely brought the word collaboration into new meaning for me, because, you know, a lot of people will say, oh, you have to have one leader all the time. And we tried to do that a little bit structurally. Like I was like producer, but I was also writer and director. And then, you know, Will was writer and producer, and then Mark was director and camera. So we tried to give each other these roles. We really did develop a deep level of trust for each other, to know when somebody came in with, oh, it has to be this way. And there was this sort of energetic knowingness that whatever they were saying, like the other two knew. It was like almost an organic knowing of when to back off and let the other one rise. And we called it a tangled hierarchy. And if that's why at the end of the movie you see our names, we put them in a triangle and they spin, because it was really a tangled hierarchy. But the other thing that I would tell you, and I don't know that I see this enough in filmmaking, is that for whatever reason, we were never so attached to our ideas. We were genuinely like interested in what would work. And I'll give you a great example of what happened. If you remember the scene with Amanda in the train station, in the subway station, when she's looking at Emoto's pictures, we had Armin Shimmerman, right? And so we shot for like 5 hours, and it's a big, long, steady cam shot and this whole thing. And as we were finally filming it, it looked like Armin Shimmerman was some sort of creepy stalker, and he was going to it just was not working. And because he didn't have this one line, the line that is now one of the most famous lines in the entire movie, if thoughts can do that to water, imagine what thoughts do to us. So we're Mark and Will and I are kind of off in the corner, like arguing about what we should do because it's not working. And there was this ginormous Steadicam operator named Eichen, this German guy. I mean, he was like 7 feet tall. He was huge. And he's like just the most sweet, affable guy. And he kind of pops over to us and he's got the Steadicam on him and he goes, listen, I have an idea. Maybe this will help. And he turns around and he says, this should happen, and then that guy should say, if thoughts can do that to water, then that's water can do imagine what water can do to us. And Mark, Will, and I like turn around like, and he was only on the set for I think 1 day before this, like because he was the Steadicam guy, and we're just like, that's exactly what should happen, and that's what we did, and it became one of the most quintessential scenes in the movie, and that's. I can tell you that every day something like that happened. And this was also the first movie that I'd ever worked on where before you could work on the movie, even if you were a day player, a PA, an intern, whatever, you had to read the script. And a lot of times PAs and grips, nobody reads the script. But extras, there were going to be an extra. We cast everybody had to read the script. And so we really worked hard to create this collective creative consciousness that was present on set all the time. Some of the best answers to the questions that you hear from the scientists or the people that we interview, and we traveled all over the country. And we would pick up sound people and electricians in every city. And so the way the interviews would go was Will would interview usually first, then Mark would interview, then I would interview. And it was about an 8-hour day. And at the end of my interview, I would turn around and I would say, does anybody in the room have any questions? And everyone did. I mean, like, you know, the guy that looks like the tattooed crazy guy that looks like he's just some grip dude comes out with some amazing, brilliant question. And so I always say that this film is a collective and that, yes, Mark, Will, and I got to have the Tangled hierarchy, but there was every single day, some person jumped into that consciousness and played and was curious enough. And that's really what made this film what it was.
Wow.
The magic shows, but that's incredible to get that backstory, Betsy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That's how I love making films that way. I wish we could make more of them, but.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, that's the way. I mean, to tap, in a way, it really kind of seems like creating that collective collaborative field theoretically would more powerfully connect you with the greater field.
Well, it's like I look at filmmaking or storytelling as like it's an entity that's just coming through me. So it's a life force. And I'm just the little electrical outlet that it got plugged into, that's hanging out here in space, and it just goes, oh, there's an open plug right there. So I don't operate with ownership, like this is mine, I have to have it my way, and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that we didn't really have that too much on the Bleep. Because it was also so experimental, and we didn't really know what we were doing. Like Will did the heavy lifting and took 90 hours of interviews. I mean, 90 hours, think about that, of interviews, of wonking talking heads about quantum physics, molecular biology, and neuroscience, mind you, and dropped it down to 6 hours, which was like, that in and of itself is just kind of mind-blowing that he was able to do that piece. And then he and I then looked at it and said, well, what are we going to do with this? And so, you know, there was constant moments of like, I don't know, let's try this, you know? And so that to me, that came from just an openness and an open-mindedness to, well, there's no rules here. Nobody's saying how to, you know?
This is another great point. And I've had that same experience, that every single film that I've approached as an experiment going into unknown territory was more powerful than any other of the films.
Yeah.
That there's hands down, when you're coming from that open beginner's mind, magic happens.
Right.
It's really, so that is, I think, another key element in connecting us into the wave.
Yeah.
Into the creative wave. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Betsy, I have a question. Where did the money come from for this film? How'd you get it financed?
That's a great question. Because, you know, a lot of people come to me and they go, okay, how did What the Bleep get made? And the reality is we had money. We had Will's money. So great story. Will is just a hilarious dude. And Will used to literally build rockets. That's what he graduated college, and he made rockets. And then he got really tired of making rockets. And he was a bit of a, I guess, I don't know, I would call him like a little hippie. And he ended up going and following some guru. And the guru said, this was way early on in the sort of tech world, way back in the day. And the guru said, I wish I had gone to this guru, because he told everybody in his group, 300 people, go out and start a tech company. And so Will wrote a piece of software that other people, that they kind of band together. It's almost like, you know how Landmark and those places, they get leadership groups together. This is what this did, only it was a bunch of hippies. And they're all rich hippies now, just so everybody knows. Like I said, I wish I had been in this group. So he wrote a piece of software. And it's a piece of software, I think it's called AutoSys, but it's a piece of software that every bank in the world uses. And he sold that software. And then he got really frustrated because he felt like he didn't sell it. He felt like the company he sold it to went and sold it for millions more. And so he got really frustrated. So then he decided, and he tells this story of him walking down, I think he's in New York, and he wrote another piece of software that was better than the other piece of software. And he makes this deal with the universe. He tells us, he says, I look up at the universe and I said, if I can sell this company for this much money, I will commit 10% of my earnings to doing things that raise consciousness on the planet. And so he sold the company, and he was now committed. And so we ended up spending, when all is said and done, I think somewhere between $10 and $12 million. Today, this movie would be a lot easier to make. But back then, you know, you couldn't go get the kind of animation that now kids do it, and my son is 12 and can probably do half of it himself. But at the time, we had to go to South Africa and places to do it. So that's why it cost so much. But yeah, that's where we got the money.
Brilliant. I love that. My dream would be to create a fund for creatives, conscious creatives, to explore, to have the ability to go into the process like you and your team did, and see what emerges. And I think what's really sad is that too often it's, you know, here's the script, here are the comps, here's the, you know, financial return, and filmmakers, rightly so, feel like, oh, I can't deviate. I got to have my plan and I got to stick to it, because you know, I've got to either make a return on other people's money or my own. So that's incredible.
It's tough but I think that there's a way to do both. You know, I'll plug my book. I have a book coming out at the end of the year about documentary filmmaking. And I'm a big planner. I'm very organized, as you know. I'm very, I've got everything going. But to me, having that organization creates more space for the creative side. But also to understand, like one of the things that we always knew when we were making the Bleep was, what did we want to say? What was it that we were trying to say? That never shifted from even the beginning when I met Will. You know, Will wanted to make a movie about how your thoughts affect reality. So that was a very clear statement. And that we never wavered from. I mean, that's basically what the whole movie is about, and essentially. Sure, there's different pieces of how we explain how that works, but I think that having that clear, very concise, this is what we want to tell people message helped us because it grounded us in something. It gave us something to come down to, in the sense that we could, I mean, there were so many things we could have gone off on, but when we knew, and so I teach filmmakers all the time, have your grounding statement. Like, what is your grounding statement that you want? If I leave this movie theater, I want to be able to say, I know how thoughts affect reality. Okay, that's your grounding statement. Now that gives you the freedom to, how are you going to, what are the ways in which you can express that statement? Like what toys and fun things can, or interesting things or touching things can you do? But that having that grounding statement was I think vital to us making the movie, because we would have gotten lost otherwise. I think. I mean, we could have gone down a rabbit hole for real if we had not had that.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I totally agree. I think the most powerful process you can get is that combination,
right,
of planning and freedom. You know, just finding that sweet spot, and different people can do it different ways, but I think there's a lot to that, because it's like in film school they always teach us about Murphy's Law.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if anything can go wrong, it will, and it does usually. Oh yeah. But you know, early on, I had an experience where I kind of discovered that that if what went wrong, actually, when I rolled with it, when I let go of my plans and looked at, all right, I'm not able to do this. What can I do here?
Right.
When you can flow with that, it's funny because I had a scene in a film that we couldn't do how I planned it. I ended up doing, you know, all over the place, and I just rolled with whatever it was, and it ended up for the audience being their favorite scene.
It's like Icon.
Right? So it's, in a way, I think if we look at Murphy's Law as the universe attempting to co-create with us.
Right.
So we could have our plans and our ideas and our grounding for sure, and we have to be open to the messages from the universe, you know, from other people, and also from the obstacles. If we hold those as the universe kind of helping us find our way.
And we need that, whatever can go right will go right.
I like that.
Right.
I don't know whose law that is. It's not Murphy's, but you know.
Murphy's sister's law. No, I could tell you lots of things that happened on the Bleep that would just shock you and horrify you. As a filmmaker, you would just go, wow. But I think, you know, I think that in terms of another thing that I talk to when I teach, and I share a lot with students about, is the idea that we never wanted to preach anything. You know, this is, you know, I always want to get this message out, especially to filmmakers who want to be conscious filmmakers, is that conscious filmmakers, me included, have this tendency to think we're conscious filmmakers, so therefore we're like more conscious than everybody else. And so I try to say to filmmakers, don't be a conscious filmmaker, because the minute you just say I'm conscious and I've got this all figured out, the frequency and the tone of your film turns into a preach, as opposed to an experience. And that's something I've seen a lot of, and a lot of people come to me as filmmakers and they go, gosh, why aren't conscious movies out there more? And why can't we get them on TV? And why? And part of, I think, the reason is because a lot of filmmakers take everything way too seriously. And they try to change the world. So I did write on my list, I want to make a movie that changes the world. But that was the last time I thought about that. I got so interested in, this is so cool. Imagine if we all understood this. That is so exciting. And it wasn't so much like, I'm going to change the world. And it was just like, kind of like I became almost like a 5-year-old child with the information. Mommy, I want you to hear this. Only my mommy happened to be hopefully 30 million people on the planet. But that for energy, I think you're more freer, and it's less daunting and less stressful.
Yeah.
Because there's less pressure. It's like, I'm not on the pressure to try to be this conscious filmmaker that's going to make this film. I'm more like a child with a paintbrush, and there's more freedom in that creativity than the other side. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like you could set that as your goal, but then you have to let it go.
Yeah. Well, because that's true. I do that with everything. I've had a lot of successes and way more failures as a filmmaker. People oftentimes will come up to me and say, well, when are you going to make the next Bleep? And I'm like, that will never happen. I don't even know how the first one happened. I think I'm going to recreate the second one. I think the fun of what we get to do as creators is, for me, the outcome is irrelevant. It's the process. It's the journey of creation that makes it so exciting for me. And for whatever reason, sitting in humble gratitude that it has afforded me life. I can feed myself and my children and do all the stuff that I need to do in the life for the most part. I wish I had a better back end deal on Bleep, but I didn't. But beyond that, but I think that being in that space of enjoying the process, part of what I teach a lot is kids to do business plans, student filmmakers to do business plans, because I really do think that people, and this might sound counterintuitive, but if you're a filmmaker, you have to do a business plan, because otherwise, you could get lost. I've had filmmakers come to me that have mortgaged their homes and done things that I just was like, pull my hair out at this moment, going, oh my God, why would you do that? But they got so caught up in their creativity. So there's an important side. The business side of filmmaking is as important as the creative side. And I think you have more space in the creative side if you've done the business side. And so for me, I plan these things, which means I have a goal for my outcome. I have a desired, I want it to land here. I want this to happen with it. But like you said, then you just go. And if you really are a conscious filmmaker and you really are working from intention and a clear mission, it's almost fail-proof, because you're guided there. It's like you're guided there when you have a clear mission, a clear intention, a clear story that you want to say. That's when it really does, even with all the Murphys popping out of, the closet, it always comes together. And that's literally what happened with What the Bleep, because that's exactly how it was made.
Beautiful.
Can I ask, does anybody have any questions there? I see
It's time, yeah.
Hi, Liz.
Time's open for questions.
Liz was one of my students, my former doc students right there. She could tell you how I lectured those kids.
That was great. I had, when I found out Betsy was going to be, I didn't know she was teaching there when I went to film school. And What the Bleep had just, it was my favorite movie. I watched it over and over again. And then they said, oh yeah, she teaches here. And I just was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. So I learned a lot from her. We did learn a lot about business plans. And I was also her PA on Coach, right? Yeah. Our next movie. Learned a lot from her in that way. It's just such a pleasure to have this kind of a person in your life.
Oh, I love you. And your kids.
Beautiful. I love the love.
I have this thing of collecting my students, and I keep them around.
Yeah.
And I check in on them all the time. They're like my children.
She's also a good writer too. She helped me with a lot of the books that I've been writing.
Oh, Michael has a question.
I just wanted to say thank you for making the movie. It came at a really important time in my life. So that's it. It's a real pleasure to meet you all, and it's great.
Mwah. I love you, Michael. I've known Michael. He's been in my social world for a long time. Very supportive. I love it.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's great.
What was your favorite part of the movie? Like, what was your favorite scene? Do you remember?
Well, it was the way I used to think, you know, my philosophy. So I was watching it and I thought, oh my God, people think the same way I do, you know? And what I'm clinging to at the moment is the different dimensions where you can exist. So there's a version of me that is in the dimension where Hillary won the presidency. And I'm trying to get back there.
Believe me.
So that's what stuck with me since 2016.
I hear you. I hear you. Cool. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Mikey Group brings up a great point, though, too. I think we talked about this a little bit online, that I think it's beautiful how movies that tap into some kind of collective thing going on I think every film has the capacity to touch people at just the right moment in their lives. But it seems to me, too, that films that really tap in to the collective wave seem to really have more of that happening. So it's almost like there's a lot that people will get that as if it's speaking to them personally in their own life.
And we got a lot of, I mean, it's really humbling. And like, if you had asked me 30 years ago if this is what I was going to be doing with my life, 30 years ago, I was a producer at Playboy and also producing porn. So there was like no correlation. That's the absolute, right? You know that, Liz. I'm surprised. I told you that. It's like not even making sense. But the thing that is really amazing is that we got thousands, and I still get emails and letters, and it's weird when I'll go somewhere and somebody would say, oh, she made the Bleep, the response that I get, because I think that the Bleep really did open up. It's almost like it brought consciousness out of the closet.
Mm.
It's like
Well said.
It really was an opportunity for people to go, I think this way, and I think this way, and everybody's now having, you know, consciousness groups. And after the Bleep, you know, before Bleep, there I think was maybe one university that had a consciousness studies program. Now I think every university does. And so, you know, I say to filmmakers and creators, dream big, go after making another Bleep, but it's not a disappointment if it doesn't happen, because most good product impacts at least one person. And if you impact one person in the world and make a change in their life for the good, you're impacting thousands of others. So, you know, people come to me a lot and say, we want to make the next Bleep. And I say, don't make the next Bleep. Make a film that will change one person's life. Focus there. And you will probably change thousands, if not thousands more people's lives. And to take that pressure or that idea that we have to somehow make something that's so amazing, because I think that takes you out of the space of real creativity.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, that's also to understand that even if we're making a work that it feels like no one sees it, that doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact. You know, that's like, as you said, one person could see it and they could change the world. And there's really a lot of cases where in film and even in music or whatever, and all the arts, where a lot of creators were inspired by somebody who wasn't really successful, or a film, or a piece of art. I think it was the Velvet Underground, who, you know, like most big musicians were influenced by the Velvet Underground, but most people never heard of them.
Right.
It's, you know, so you can still have a profound impact, you know, and so not holding that is really important. Yeah. You can't get caught in that.
Film, it's called The Empty Womb, and it's a short film, and it's about a woman who was dealing with infertility, and I shot an interview with her, and then she had this incredible art installation that she had built to deal with her grieving and her process of loss. And I would say about 90% of the footage that was the B-roll was ruined and unusable. And her story was so profound that it's an 18-minute film, of which almost all of it is either a close-up or a wide of her talking. And I thought, this is horrifying. This is terrible. I don't have any B-roll, barely any cutaways. And so I put it together, and then I showed it to a group of women who were going through infertility. And the craziest thing happened was that they all said, I see her. Nobody sees my pain. Nobody sees my grief. They think, oh, you should be happy. You don't have to there's all this stuff, but you just let me be with her and see her. And I loved that. And I went, okay. And, but it was, again, a happy accident, but I let the film do what it needed to do, you know? So I don't know if that helps anybody, but in terms of storytelling, it's amazing how can happen with very little, you know, with the right story. She had an amazing story. So, and she was a great storyteller herself. So it worked out really well, but just the simplicity was even more powerful than the fancy movie tricks.
Which the universe was helping you to shift directions.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is really the key, right? Is the personal journey, the personal story, focusing on that and letting that transcend to the universal, right? So if we can share our personal journeys and our unique personal stories, and like you said, even if it's one person says, I resonate with that and then is inspired, but the likelihood is there's so many more people who have experienced what we've experienced and can just, again, feel that connection, right? Feel connected to something greater than themselves through our sharing of our personal stories.
Right. And then make sure you have a point as a filmmaker, make sure you have a point. Like at the end of the film, what's my takeaway? And I think if you give somebody a compelling story, even if there's even on my Empty Womb doc, which is on Amazon, by the way, if you know anybody, a woman or especially a woman who's going through that, it's a really powerful piece because she's a great storyteller. But at the end, there was a very clear takeaway for the viewer that gave them a sense of purpose in watching it. So they had a profound healing while listening to her tell her story and her journey. And then they could walk away with something that gave them a piece to take away with. And it's because I think, when we get excited about sharing, whatever subject, we get a little too broad and a little too out there and a little too much. And we need to really simplify what we're talking about. And that's where a personal story comes into handy, because you can use that personal story and build from it, but you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's really important still in filmmaking. I think, didn't you do Mark Kaplan, Joseph Campbell, something on Joseph Campbell recently, or somebody else on Conscious Good, Conscious Creators Network did a course on the myths of storytelling. She did the heroine's journey though. Tom so-and-so did the heroine's journey.
Tom Schlesinger, yeah.
So as a filmmaker, that's knowing the heroine's journey and the hero's journey is we followed that map when we did the Bleep. And it was really interesting because I'm pretty sure it was Mark who was big into Joseph Campbell. And I had been big into the structure of script writing. And so I had never really heard about Joseph Campbell. And Mark really didn't think too much about the structure of script writing. And then when we got together, we were like, oh, we're really talking about the exact same thing. And we, at that time, we're old. So at that time, there wasn't really Google it, we had to kind of figure this stuff out on our own. But we used that tool in making of the Bleep very much, the hero's journey. Amanda goes directly, if you watch what the Bleep and you sit with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, you will tick off the beats one by one.
Another thing that's really fascinating is having your main character be deaf.
Well,
how did that happen?
That was a Murphy's Law. That was a happy accident. So when we wrote, we 90 hours to 6 hours. So then imagine, I can't sit still for nothing. So sitting down to watch 6 hours of interviews, I thought my head was about to explode. And so a lot of the interviews were repetitive. We had 4 different people say pretty much the same thing. And we kept it that way because we knew we'd probably only use 1 or 2 of them, but that way we knew all the options available because one person said it this way or things like that. And so after we watched that 6 hours, I remember turning to Will and I said, okay, this person can't talk a lot. They have to be able to we have to have long scenes with lots of action. This has got to be the show me part of the movie because the interviews are all the tell me. And if we have more wah, wah, wah in the scenes, everyone's head's going to explode. So when we wrote the script, Amanda didn't have a lot of dialogue. And so our casting director, we put in the breakdowns when we're starting to cast, the actress really had to be comfortable without dialogue, that just really had to be able to act with her face and her body and in every part of her being because that was how the story was going to be told. And then Marley's people came to us and said, hey, what about Marley Maitland? And we were like, well, she's deaf. So right at the first, we're like, she's deaf. That doesn't make any sense. And then all of a sudden, within about a minute, Mark, Will, and I went, it makes perfect sense. What are we talking about? And that's how Marley got in the movie.
Oh, that's such a great story. I love it. I love it. So it wasn't this PC move. It was a very organic, universal.
Listen, we did a wine toast at 6 a.m. on the first day of shooting. So, you know, let me tell you, it was not there was nothing PC about this entire movie. And I mean, one of my favorite scenes is, like, I am a huge fan of Busby Berkeley dance numbers. And so, unfortunately, we wanted to film in this one church in Portland, but once the church figured out what we were doing, they were like, you're not filming in our church. So we ended up moving to this other church. And if you remember all the IV stands, the scene with the IV stands, they're all dancing with their addictions.
Yes.
So I can Will and Mark to put a Busby Berkeley dance number in the middle of the movie. And we didn't have a high enough ceiling to do the big thing. But this great Portland dance crew choreographed that whole thing. And the whole Polish wedding, at the time, the character, the father, is modeled after my real father-in-law. At the time, I'm divorced now, but at the time, Bruna, who, like, total Polish wedding, because we had just had a Polish wedding like a year before that we shot that scene. So, I mean, all very, no pairs for bridesmaids, but still.
Love that. And I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface of just all the behind the scenes and the really the magic behind the scenes, and that you were able to capture. So such a delight. And it is tempting to say, oh, come on, you got to do more. You got to do a sequel. You got to do the sequel because the first one is so good. But then I think we just have to celebrate, you know, the originality and the power and the magic of the first, and go, okay, what, you know, universe, I'm ready for that next plug, right?
Or anyone else. You know,
right.
everybody, why don't you make the next What the Bleep? And I'll come.
Exactly.
Mark says.
I just wanted to thank you so much. This has been wonderful, really, and just such a great blessing for us to have this opportunity.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. And thank you, Mark. And thank everyone for joining us for this evening's Movie of the Month discussion. And feel free to instant message me or Mark on the network if you have recommendations for what you'd like to see for upcoming group events. And somebody had an idea I saw recently of the group viewing as a group. So by all means, feel free to send those through a chat on the network.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Signing off now.